The blood-soaked warning sign nailed above the dying native woman read, "White man, don't forgive." But frontier doctor Everett Hayes cut her down anyway, unaware that his act of mercy would transform his abandoned homestead into a sanctuary where two worlds could heal together. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The winter winds sliced through Dr. Everett Hayes' coat like a knife through tender flesh. His breath billowed in white clouds as he hunched forward in the saddle, eyes squinting against the needles of sleet that stung his weathered face. He should have stayed at his cabin, should have barred the door against the coming storm, but the message had been urgent. A child with fever at the McClellan homestead, 5 miles out. The doctor's oath left no room for comfort. The trail narrowed as he guided his horse through the skeletal trees, their bare branches clawing at the iron-gray sky. 3 years in this Montana territory, and winter still felt like an enemy he couldn't quite defeat. Back east in Boston, winter had been genteel, a season of fireplaces and mulled wine. Here it killed without remorse. When the first gunshot cracked through the forest, Everett's mar reared, nearly throwing him. His medical bag slipped, dangling precariously from the saddle horn. The second shot came fast behind it, followed by distant shouting. "Whoa, girl," he soothed, steadying the nervous animal. "Easy now." His hand hovered over the revolver at his hip. 3 years had taught him that much. At least a doctor in these parts carried more than just medicine. He dismounted, tethered the mare to a low branch, and moved forward on foot, each step calculated and quiet. The voices grew clearer as he approached a clearing. 3 men on horseback, their faces hidden beneath the brims of snow-dusted hats. Between them, a fourth horse riderless. And there, crumpled in the snow like a discarded doll, lay a woman. "Just leave her," one man growled. "She'll be dead by nightfall anyway." "Waste of a bullet if you ask me," another replied. "Should have just let her hang." Everett's heart hammered against his ribs. He was 1 man against 3, all armed and clearly dangerous. The woman's body hadn't moved. Perhaps she was already dead. Perhaps the rational choice was to retreat, to pretend he'd seen nothing. The child with fever still needed him, but 20 years of medicine had trained his eyes too well. Even from this distance, he caught the slight rise and fall of her chest. Alive, then, not for long in this cold. "Let's go," the third man said. "Storm's getting worse." They wheeled their horses around, and Everett pressed himself against a tree trunk, praying they'd take the northern path away from where he'd left his mare. Fortune favored him. They thundered off in the opposite direction, their voices fading into the howling wind. When he was certain they were gone, Everett rushed to the woman. She lay face down in the bloodied snow, her dark hair fanned out like spilled ink. Her clothes were thin, unsuitable for the weather, and torn in places that suggested a struggle, or worse. He knelt beside her, his doctor's instincts taking over. Gently he turned her over, bracing for the worst. Her face was a map of violence, a split lip, a bruised cheekbone, a gash above her left eyebrow that had painted half her face crimson. But beneath the blood and bruising, he glimpsed high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and skin the color of burnished copper. Native. That explained the men's callousness, if not their cruelty. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, finding a pulse, thready but persistent. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, and she was dying. "Miss, can you hear me?" Everett asked, knowing there would be no response. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her still form, then lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a bird with broken wings. The McClellan child would have to wait. This woman wouldn't survive another hour in the snow. His mare nickered nervously as he approached with his burden, but stood steady as he draped the unconscious woman across the saddle before mounting behind her. He cradled her against his chest, one arm secure around her waist while the other held the reins. "Home, girl," he murmured to his horse, and quick about it. The storm intensified as they rode, fat snowflakes replacing the sleet. The temperature dropped with each passing minute. Everett couldn't feel his fingers by the time his cabin came into view, a lone sentinel against the wilderness. Smoke curling from the stone chimney where he'd banked the fire before leaving. His homestead stood on the edge of abandonment. Once, he'd had plans, grand plans of a proper medical practice, a thriving farm, maybe even a family, but Montana had other ideas. The unforgiving land, the isolation, the constant struggle just to survive, it had worn him down to bare essentials. Just him and his medicine now in a cabin half finished and increasingly neglected. With numb hands, he dismounted and carried the woman inside, laying her on his narrow bed. The fire had dwindled to embers. He stoked it quickly, added log, then returned to his patient. In the warm glow of the fire, her injuries looked even worse. Besides the facial wounds, her wrists were raw and bleeding rope burns. Her fingernails were torn and caked with dirt and blood, evidence that she'd fought her captors. And beneath the torn neckline of her dress, he glimpsed what looked like burns, deliberate ones. "What did they do to you?" he whispered, anger coiling in his gut. Methodically, he began to treat her wounds. He cleaned the gash on her forehead first, revealing that it would need stitches. As he prepared his needle and catgut, the woman stirred slightly, a soft moan escaping her lips. "You're safe now," Everett said, unsure if she could hear him. "I'm a doctor. I'm going to help you." Her eyelids fluttered but remained closed. He continued his work, stitching the wound with practiced precision, then cleaning and bandaging her other injuries. The burns on her collarbone were indeed deliberate small circular marks that turned his stomach. Cigar burns. Outside, the storm raged, rattling the windows in their frames. Everett moved his rocking chair beside the bed and settled in for a long night. Hypothermia, blood loss, trauma, anyone could claim her before dawn. All he could do was wait and watch. Hours passed. The fire crackled. Occasionally the woman would stir, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Once she cried out, her hand shooting up as if to ward off a blow. Everett caught it gently, held it until she calmed. Near midnight, her fever spiked. He bathed her brow with cool water, spooned broth between her cracked lips when she was calm enough. By the small hours of the morning, he was reciting old medical texts from memory just to stay awake. His voice a quiet rumble beneath the storm's fury. Dawn broke with unexpected clarity. The storm had passed, leaving a world transformed by snow, pristine and silent. Everett, who had finally dozed in his chair, woke with a start. The woman was watching him. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and sharp with intelligence and fear. She lay perfectly still, like prey hoping to escape a predator's notice. "Good morning," he said softly, keeping his distance. "My name is Dr. Everett Hayes. You're in my cabin. You're safe." She said nothing, her gaze flicking to the door, the window back to him. "You were injured," he continued. "I found you in the forest. Do you remember what happened?" Her split lip quivered slightly, but her face remained impassive. Everett noticed her hands gripping the blanket, knuckles white. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I'm a doctor. I only want to help." After a long silence, she spoke, her voice a rasp. "Water." He rose slowly, telegraphing his movements, and poured water from a pitcher into a cup. He held it out, keeping his distance. She tried to sit up, winced, then accepted his help with obvious reluctance. The cup trembled in her hands as she drank. "Thank you," she whispered, the words clearly costing her effort. "You're welcome," Everett replied. "May I know your name?" She lowered the cup, considering him with those fathomless eyes. "Sarah," she said finally. "My name is Sarah." He knew immediately it was a lie, a white name, offered to a white man for safety. He didn't press. "Well, Sarah," he said, "you have 3 broken ribs, 27 stitches, and more bruises than I care to count. You need rest, food, and time to heal. Those men," she began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "They're gone," Everett assured her, "and they won't find you here." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust. Not yet, but perhaps the barest easing of terror. She nodded once, then leaned back against the pillow, exhaustion claiming her again. As she drifted back to sleep, Everett stood at the window, looking out at his neglected homestead buried under snow. He had questions, many of them, but they could wait. For now, it was enough that she was alive, that she had spoken, that somewhere beneath the brutality inflicted upon her, a woman named Sarah, or whatever her real name might be, still existed. He just hoped he could keep her that way. For 3 days, Sarah drifted between consciousness and darkness. Everett kept vigil, abandoning his rounds to other homesteads, sending apologies via a passing trapper. The fever that had taken hold of her waxed and waned like the moon, sometimes leaving her lucid enough to accept water and broth, other times plunging her into nightmares that left her thrashing against invisible enemies. In her delirium, she spoke in her native tongue, Blackfoot, Everett guessed, though he wasn't certain. He'd learned a smattering of tribal languages during his time in the territory, enough to recognize the difference between Crow and Blackfoot, but not enough to understand her fevered murmuring. Sometimes, though, she would slip into English, fragments that painted a horrific picture. "Please, no more fire. I told you what you wanted. They're coming for you too." On the 4th morning, Everett woke from his uncomfortable position in the chair to find her sitting up, her back pressed against the headboard, watching him with clear eyes. The fever had broken sometime in the night. "You stayed," she said, surprise evident in her voice. Everett stretched his stiff limbs. "This is my home," he replied gently. "No." She gestured at the chair. "You stayed, watching over me." He smiled slightly. "That's what doctors do." She studied him, her gaze unwavering. In the daylight, with the worst of her facial bruising fading to yellows and greens, he could see she was beautiful, not in the porcelain doll way of Boston ladies, but with a fierce, sharp-edged beauty that matched the land itself. "Why did you save me?" she asked abruptly. The question took him aback. "Because you needed saving." She shook her head. "White men don't save Indian women. They ... single quotes." She trailed off, her hand unconsciously rising to the cigar burns on her collarbone. Anger flashed through him again. "I'm not those men." "No," she agreed after a long moment. "Perhaps not." A tentative truce, then. Everett rose from the chair. "Are you hungry? I can make something more substantial than broth now that your fever's broken." She nodded. And he busied himself at the small stove, frying salt pork and mixing cornmeal for Johnny cakes. As he worked, he felt her eyes on him, assessing, calculating. "You're not a frontier doctor," she said suddenly. He glanced over his shoulder. "What makes you say that?" "Your hands. Too soft. Your speech. Too ... Single quotes. She searched for the word. "Educated," Everett chuckled. "Guilty as charged. Boston born and trained. Massachusetts General Hospital. Why come here?" The question was blunt. "Suspicious." He turned back to the stove, flipping the Johnny cakes with more force than necessary. "The war," he said simply. "I saw enough death to last several lifetimes. The war between the states had ended a decade ago." But for Everett, the memories remained as fresh as yesterday. An endless rows of cots. The screams of men having limbs sawed off without anesthesia. The gangrene, the dysentery, the futility of it all. Medicine was supposed to heal, not merely comfort the dying. He'd come west seeking simplicity, purpose, distance from the ghosts that haunted him. "So you came to die in the wilderness instead?" There was no mockery in her tone, only a strange understanding. Something like that, he admitted. When the food was ready, he brought it to her on a tin plate. She ate cautiously at first, then with obvious hunger. He sat across from her in the chair, eating his own portion more slowly. Now, he said when she'd finished, I believe it's your turn. What's your real name? She set the plate aside, her expression carefully neutral. Nimai, she said after a pause. It means thunder. Nimai, he repeated, trying to match her pronunciation. Blackfoot? She nodded once. My father was a medicine man. My mother was... single quotes. She hesitated. Not from our tribe. Mixed blood, Everett said, understanding dawning. That explained her excellent English, her features that combined native strength with something else, perhaps Mexican or Spanish. The worst of both worlds, Nimai replied bitterly. Not white enough for one side, not pure enough for the other. Is that why those men had you? Her face hardens. Those men had me because they could, because that is what happens to women like me. She looked away. My village was raided 3 months ago. Government soldiers and settlers. They said we had stolen cattle. We hadn't. They burned the lodges, killed the elders. I was taken. The clinical part of Everett's mind noted the flatness of her voice, the dissociation common in patients who had endured severe trauma. The human part of him wanted to reach across the space between them and offer comfort, but he knew better. Touch, for her, had become synonymous with pain. How did you end up in the woods where I found you? He asked instead. Nimai's hands curled into fists. I killed one of them, the one who liked to burn me. I took his knife while he slept and I put it in his throat. She looked up, defiant, as if expecting judgment. The others beat me, said they would hang me, but then decided it would be better to let me freeze to death. More suffering that way. Everett exhaled slowly. In another life, he might have been shocked by her confession, but he'd seen too much of human cruelty to judge her harshly for fighting back. You're safe here, he said again, the words feeling inadequate against the magnitude of her experience. For now, she replied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Until they realize their friend is dead and I am not. The implication was clear. Her presence put him in danger. Everett considered this. He should, by all logic, help her recover enough to travel, then send her on her way. Self-preservation demanded it. Instead, he found himself saying, then we'd better make sure you heal quickly so you can help me defend this place if they come. Surprise flickered across her face. You would fight for me? A stranger? An Indian? I would fight against injustice, he corrected. And it seems to me you've seen more than your fair share of it. Something shifted in her expression, then not quite trust, but perhaps the seed of it. Rest now, he said, rising to take her plate. Tomorrow, if you're feeling stronger, we can see about getting you on your feet that night. Everett made a pallet for himself near the fire, giving Nimai the bed before sleep claimed him. He found himself thinking about the homestead, how the fences needed mending, how the garden he'd attempted to plant last spring had withered from neglect, how the barn's roof leaked in 3 places. He'd let everything slide, focused only on his medical duties, on numbing himself with work and whiskey. But now, with another life depending on his protection, the state of the place seemed suddenly important. A defensible homestead required upkeep. The irony wasn't lost on him that it would take the arrival of a half-dead woman to remind him he was still alive. In the morning, he woke to find Nimai standing at the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered mountains. Her profile was sharp against the golden light, her posture straight despite her injuries. She looked like she belonged there, silhouetted against the wild landscape in a way he never had. The white bark trees are speaking, she said without turning. Everett joined her at the window, keeping a respectful distance. What are they saying? She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. That change comes, whether we wish it or not. He followed her gaze to the aspen grove beyond his fence line, their white trunks gleaming in the morning light, their branches bare but somehow hopeful against the blue sky. Well, he said quietly, sometimes change is exactly what's needed. For the first time, Nimai smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. It was brief, there and gone like lightning, but it left Everett with the strangest feeling that perhaps, in saving her, he might have saved something in himself as well. By the end of the first week, Nimai could walk the length of the cabin without assistance, though pain etched lines around her mouth with each step. Everett watched her progress with professional satisfaction and personal admiration. Her resilience was remarkable, the kind he'd seen in only the strongest soldiers during the war. Your ribs are healing well, he noted one morning as he changed her bandages, but you need to be careful not to overexert yourself. Nimai made a dismissive sound. In my tribe, women give birth and return to work the same day. We cannot afford weakness. It's not weakness to heal properly, Everett countered. It's wisdom. She regarded him with that penetrating gaze that always made him feel she was seeing more than he intended to reveal. Your medicine and my medicine are different, doctor. You treat the body. My father taught that we must treat the spirit also. And how is your spirit? He asked, genuinely curious. She was silent for a long moment. Angry, she finally said, but alive. It was more than she'd shared previously about her inner state, and Everett recognized it as the gift. It was a small token of growing trust. Outside, the January cold had settled into the land like a predator, patient and merciless. Everett had ventured out only for necessities, chopping firewood, tending to his horse and the single milk cow that somehow survived his sporadic care, and making one brief trip to the nearest homestead to check on the McClellan child, who had recovered without his help. He had not yet told anyone about Nimai. The fewer who knew of her presence, the safer she would be. The territory buzzed with tension between settlers and the remaining native tribes, and a woman who had confessed to killing a white man, no matter how justified, would find little sympathy if discovered. On the 10th day, Nimai stood at the door, wrapped in one of Everett's old coats. "I need air," she announced. "Real air. Not this stale cabin breath." Everett looked up from the medical journal he'd been reading. "It's 15 degrees outside. Then I will be quick," she replied, her hand already on the latch. He sighed, knowing better than to argue. "At least take this," he said, offering her his scarf. "And don't go beyond the fence line, please." She accepted the scarf with a nod and slipped outside. Through the window, Everett watched her make her way carefully across the yard, her breath clouding around her. She moved like someone reclaiming her body, testing its limits and capability. When she reached the broken fence, she stopped, surveying the neglected fields beyond with a critical eye. Later, as they sat by the fire drinking coffee, she said abruptly, "Your land is dying." Everett blinked. "Pardon?" "Your homestead. It dies slowly while you live in it." She gestured around them. "The fence falls. The fields grow nothing. Even this cabinet is half finished, like you started to build a real home and then forgot why." Her assessment stung, partly because it was accurate. "I'm a doctor, not a farmer," he said defensively. "I help people. The land can wait. The land feeds you, protects you. It deserves respect." She set her cup down. "Why claim it if you will not tend it?" It was a question Everett had asked himself during his darker moment. The truth was complicated, bound up in the optimism that had driven him west, in the subsequent disillusionment, in the numbing routine he'd fallen into. He'd come seeking purpose and found only isolation. "I had plans once," he admitted. "A proper medical practice in town. This place was meant to be ... single quotes he trailed off, unsure how to explain. "A new beginning," Nimai finished for him. "But the ghosts followed you from the war." Everett stared at her, unsettled by her perception. "Yes," she nodded as if confirming something to herself. "My people believe that purpose heals spirit sickness. You heal others but neglect yourself and your home. There is no balance in this ... Single quotes before Everett could respond. A sharp knock at the door froze them both. Niameh's eyes widened with fear, and she moved quickly toward the back room. "Stay there," Everett whispered, reaching for his revolver. The knock came again, followed by a familiar voice. "Doc, it's Jim Porter. Got a situation needs your attention." Everett exhaled in relief. Jim Porter was the closest thing he had to a friend in these parts. Weathered trapper who occasionally brought news and supplies from town in exchange for medical care. He tucked the revolver into his waistband and opened the door just wide enough to see Porter's bearded face. "Jim, what brings you out in this cold?" Porter stamped his feet against the chill. "Accident at the lumber camp. Man's leg got crushed. They're bringing him to town, but they sent me ahead to fetch you. Should be there by nightfall." Everett's mind raced. A crushed leg meant possible amputation, a procedure he couldn't perform alone. But leaving meant leaving Nimai unprotected. "I'll need to gather my things," he said, stalling. Porter nodded, peering past him curiously. "You got company, Doc?" Saw 2 cups on the table. Everett tensed. "Just me. Was using the second one to measure out a tincture." Porter seemed to accept this, though his eyes lingered on the interior of the cabin a moment too long. "Well, hurry up then." "It's colder than a witch's. I'll be right out," Everett interrupted, closing the door before Porter could finish his colorful metaphor. He found Nimai in the back room, already gathering his medical supplies into his bag. "You must go," she said simply. "A man may lose his leg or his life. I can't leave you alone," Everett protested. "It's not safe." She gave him a look that managed to be both amused and exasperated. "I survived on my own before you found me. I can defend myself. You were half dead when I found you," he reminded her. "And now I'm half alive," she countered. "That is improvement, yes?" Despite his concern, Everett found himself smiling at her grim humor. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Keep the door barred. There's food in the pantry and extra wood by the stove." "Go," she said, pressing the medical bag into his hands. "Save the man's leg." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small key. "The locked cabinet in the corner. Inside is my father's shotgun and ammunition. If anyone comes, I know how to use such weapons," she assured him. "Go, doctor." The ride to town was tense, with Everett constantly looking back toward his homestead. Porter noticed his distraction, but attributed it to concern for the injured logger. The surgery itself was grueling 6 hours of delicate work to repair. The man shattered tibia while attempting to save the limb. By the time Everett had stabilized the patient and given instructions to the man's wife for his care, it was well past midnight. "You're welcome to stay at the boarding house," the town's sole shopkeeper offered. "Weather's turning nasty again." "Thank you, but I need to get back," Everett replied, already donning his coat. "Ain't nothing at that rundown place of yours that can't wait till morning," Porter observed, eyeing him suspiciously. Everett forced a casual shrug. "Left experiments that need tending. Medical research." The excuse was flimsy, but it was the best he could manage in his exhausted state. The truth, that every minute away from his cabin filled him with dread for Nimei's safety, was something he could share with no one. The journey home was treacherous. Snow had begun falling again, obscuring the trail, and the temperature had dropped to a bone-aching cold that seeped through his layers of clothing. His horse struggled through drifts that hadn't been there that morning. Twice, Everett considered turning back, but the thought of Nimai alone pushed him forward. It was nearly dawn when he crested the final ridge and saw his homestead below. Relief washed through him at the sight of smoke rising from the chimney. Then, as he drew closer, he noticed something odd, a figure moving in the yard. Not Nimai, but a man, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying what looked like an armful of firewood. Everett's hand moved to his revolver as he urged his tired horse forward. Who was this stranger? And what was he doing at his cabin? More importantly, where was Nimai? As he approached, the man looked up, and Everett felt a jolt of recognition. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking the weathered face of Marshal Thorne, the territory's most relentless lawman, and the very last person who should be anywhere near a fugitive native woman. Everett schooled his features into a mask of calm as he dismounted, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Marshal Thorne," he called, keeping his voice level. "This is an unexpected visit." The marshal straightened, balancing the wood against his hip. "Dr. Hayes, heard you were in town tending to that logger. Thought I'd check on your place, seeing as how you've been absent these past weeks." Everett approached cautiously, scanning the yard for any sign of Nimai. Cabin door remained closed. "That's neighborly of you. Found your woodpile getting low," Thorne continued, nodding toward the stack he'd been adding to. "Figured you'd appreciate coming home to a warm house." "I do, thank you." Everett took the reins of his exhausted horse. "Let me just stable her and I'll put on some coffee." Thorne nodded, carrying the wood toward the porch. "Take your time. Been here a while already?" The implication sent a chill through Everett that had nothing to do with the cold. He led his horse to the small stable, mind racing. Where was Nimai? Had she fled when she saw the marshal approach, or was she still inside, hiding? And if so, had Thorne already discovered her? As he removed the saddle, Everett noticed fresh tracks in the snow leading around the back of the cabin. Too small to be the marshal's. Hope flickered. Perhaps she'd had time to escape. He finished quickly and headed back to the cabin, steeling himself for whatever he might find inside. The warmth hit him as he entered, along with the scent of coffee already brewing. Marshal Thorne stood by the stove, his coat draped over a chair, looking far too comfortable in Everett's space. The cabin appeared undisturbed. No sign of a struggle or search. No sign of Nimai. "Made myself at home," Thorne said, gesturing to the pot. "Hope you don't mind." "Not at all," Everett replied, hanging his coat by the door. His medical bag he kept with him, unwilling to set it down lest it reveal the fresh bandages and medicines he'd been using for Nimai. "What brings you all the way out here, Marshal?" "Surely not just concern for my firewood supply." Thorne's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile on a less intimidating man. "Direct as always, Doc. I like that about you." He poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one across the table. "I'm looking for a fugitive. Indian woman, mixed blood. Killed a man at the Hammond Ranch about 2 weeks back. Thought you might have heard something in your travels." Everett took the cup, grateful for something to do with his hand. "Can't say that I have. Been mostly keeping to myself, except for medical calls." The marshal studied him, eyes sharp beneath his graying brows. "That's so? Because Jim Porter mentioned you were mighty anxious to get back here after that surgery. Said you had experiments that needed tending." He glanced pointedly around the sparse cabin. "Don't see any experiments, Doc. They're in the back room." Everett lied smoothly. "Botanical extracts. Quite dull, really." Thorne sipped his coffee, unconvinced. "This woman is dangerous. Slit Hammond's son's throat while he slept. Family's offering a reward for her capture. Dead or alive?" Everett asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "They didn't specify," Thorne replied coldly, "but given what she did to young Hammond, I doubt they're particular." Everett's grip tightened on his cup. "What exactly did Hammond do to her?" The marshal's eyes narrowed. "Meaning?" Everett said carefully that men like the Hammonds have a reputation with native women, one that doesn't speak well of their character. Silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Finally, Thorne set his cup down with deliberate care. "Careful, Doc. Sounds like you're sympathizing with a murderer." "I sympathize with victims," Everett corrected, "regardless of their race." Well, Thorne said, rising from his chair, "you haven't answered my question. Have you seen this woman? Because I've been tracking her, and the trail leads mighty close to your property." Everett held the marshal's gaze. "I haven't seen any fugitives, Marshal. Only patients." Thorne nodded slowly as if filing this information away. "I'll be in the area for a few more days. If you do see anything suspicious, I expect you to send word to me." He reached for his coat. "Remember, Doc, harboring a fugitive is a serious offense. Could cost you more than just this homestead." The threat hung in the air as Thorne buttoned his coat and moved toward the door. He paused with his hand on the latch. "One more thing. Found something interesting while I was stacking your wood." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, placing it on the table. "Doesn't look like something a Boston doctor would carry." Everett stared at the item, a beaded bracelet made of leather and porcupine quills. Intricate in design, unmistakably native. "Probably dropped by whoever's been visiting your place," Thorne continued. "Good day, Doctor. I'll be seeing you soon." The door closed behind him with ominous finality. Everett waited, counting heartbeats, until he heard the marshal's horse depart. Then he moved swiftly to the window, watching until Thorne's figure disappeared into the tree line. "He's gone," he said aloud. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a soft scraping sound came from the floor near the hearth. Everett turned to see a section of floorboards lifting, revealing a hidden space beneath. Nimai emerged like a spirit, dust in her hair, her expression unguarded. Root cellar, she explained, climbing out with careful movements that betrayed her still healing ribs. I heard his horse approach. Single quotes. Relief flooded through Everett. I didn't even know there was a cellar. There is much about this home you do not know, she replied, brushing dirt from her clothes. I found it yesterday while you were gone. You should have fled into the woods, he said, more sharply than he intended. If he had found you, he would have killed me, she finished calmly, or taken me back to be hanged. But in the woods, I would have frozen. The choice was simple. Everett ran a hand through his hair, the fear he'd suppressed in Thorne's presence finally surfacing. He knows you're here, or suspects at least. Nimue moved to the table, picking up the bracelet Thorne had left. This is mine. I lost it the day you brought me here. She turned it over in her hands. It was my mother's. He'll be back, Everett warned, with more men probably. She looked up at him, her dark eyes unreadable. Then I should leave, tonight. And go where? It's the dead of winter. And you're still healing. There are places, she said vaguely, caves in the northern hills where some of my people hide. They would shelter me until spring. The thought of her leaving twisted something in Everett's chest, something he wasn't prepared to examine too closely. You'd never make it alone. Not in this weather, not in your condition. Then come with me, she said, the words hanging between them like smoke. Everett stared at her, caught off guard by the invitation. What? Come with me, she repeated. You are not safe here now either. The marshal will return and he will question why you lied. What happens to doctors who shelter fugitives? Nothing good, Everett admitted. He looked around the cabin, the only home he'd known for 3 years, meager as it was. Could he really abandon it? And for what? To flee into the wilderness with a woman he barely knew, chased by the law and the threat of violence? Yet even as these rational objections formed, he knew his decision was already made. It had been made the moment he'd lifted her broken body from the snow. Some choices, once taken, set a course that could not be diverted. I'll need to gather supplies, he said finally. Medicine, food, blankets. Relief softened Nime's features. We leave at dusk, she said. Less chance of being seen. As they prepared through the afternoon, packing only what was essential, a strange calm settled over Everett. There was clarity in crisis, in having a path forced upon it. For 3 years he'd drifted in a kind of half-life, neither fully committed to his homestead nor willing to abandon. Now circumstances had made the choice for him. By the time the winter sun began its early descent, they were ready. Everett had loaded his horse with their meager supplies, leaving behind most of his possessions. The most valuable thing he carried was his medical bag, the tools of the one calling he had never betrayed. Nimue waited by the door, wrapped in layers of clothing against the bitter cold. She held herself differently now, no longer a patient but a guide, her posture straight despite her healing wounds. Are you certain about this? Everett asked, giving her one last chance to reconsider. She looked at him, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. No, she admitted, but I am certain that staying means death, and I have not survived this long to die now. Everett nodded, understanding completely. He took one last look around the cabin, at the bed where he'd tended her, at the fire that had kept them warm, at the simple table where they'd shared meals and confidences. Then he extinguished the lantern, plunging the space into darkness. Let's go, he said quietly. They traveled under the cover of darkness, Nimue leading them along game trails too narrow for conventional passage. Everett followed on foot, leading his horse, trusting her instincts more than his own in this wilderness. The moon, a slender crescent, provided just enough light to avoid the worst obstacles, while the forest canopy shielded them from being easily spotted. How far to these caves? Everett asked, his breath clouding in the frigid air. 2 days if the weather holds, Nimue replied without turning. 3 if it doesn't. She moved with surprising agility for someone still recovering from serious injuries. Occasionally, Everett caught her pressing a hand to her side, the only indication that her ribs troubled her. But she never complained, never slowed their pace, and never asked for help. By dawn, they had covered nearly 10 miles, an impressive distance given the terrain and conditions. Nimue led them to a sheltered hollow beneath a rocky outcropping, a natural windbreak that would hide them from prying eyes. We'll rest here today, she said, helping Everett unload the essentials from his horse. Travel again tonight. Traveling at night is dangerous, he pointed out, his medical instincts surfacing. Cold, predators, risk of injury. Marshal Thorne is more dangerous, she interrupted. He will have discovered your empty cabin by now. He will track us. Everett couldn't argue with her logic. They set up a minimal camp, no fire despite the biting cold, just blankets arranged in the deepest part of the hollow. They ate cold biscuits and jerky, washing it down with water that was already developing ice crystals as the pale winter sun climbed higher, casting weak light through the trees. Everett studied their surroundings more carefully. The outcropping above them bore peculiar markings, crude pictographs of animals and hunters. Your people? He asked, gesturing toward the ancient art. Nimue nodded. Very old. From when the buffalo still covered the plains like a great blanket. She traced one of the figures with her fingertip. This is a medicine sign. It means this place has good spirits. Did you know it was here? Everett asked, curious. I followed the markers. She pointed to a series of notches on nearby trees, so subtle he would never have noticed them. My father taught me to read the land this way. The old ones left signs for those who know how to see. There was pride in her voice, and something else. A fierce connection to a heritage that settlers like himself had tried to eradicate. For the first time, Everett felt truly foreign here, despite his years in the territory. They slept in shifts, though Everett suspected Nimai barely closed her eyes during her turn. When dusk fell, they continued their journey, following hidden pathways that wound ever northward toward the distant mountains. The second night brought snow, not the blinding blizzard he'd feared, but a steady, silent accumulation that erased their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. "Good," Nimai said, glancing up at the flakes swirling in the darkness. "It will cover our trail. It will also make travel more difficult," Everett noted, already feeling the cold seeping through his boots. "Life is difficult," she replied with a shrug. "We adapt or we die." Her pragmatism was both frustrating and admirable. In Boston, Everett had been surrounded by people who complained about the most trivial inconveniences: a late dinner, a drafty parlor, an unfashionable coat. Nimai, who had endured torture and near death, accepted hardship as simply the price of survival. By the third night, Everett's body ached from the unaccustomed exertion. His hands, once nimble enough to suture the tiniest blood vessels, had grown stiff with cold, but he pressed on without complaint, unwilling to be the weak link in their desperate flight. They were crossing a frozen stream, carefully testing the ice before each step, when Nimai suddenly froze. She raised one hand, signaling for silence. Her head tilted as she listened to something beyond Everett's perception. "What is it?" he whispered after several tense seconds. "Horses," she murmured. "More than one, coming from the south." Everett strained his ears but heard nothing except the soft patter of snow and the occasional crack of a branch bending under its weight. Yet he didn't doubt her. He'd witnessed enough of her wilderness skills to trust her senses over his own. "Thorn?" he asked, dreading the answer. "Likely." Her eyes scanned their surroundings, calculating. "We need to move faster." They abandoned their careful pace for a more direct route, pushing through underbrush and scaling slopes that Nimai would have avoided under normal circumstances. Everett's horse struggled in the deeper snow, forcing them to stop periodically to rest the animal. During one such pause, the distant sound of voices reached them, too faint to distinguish words but unmistakably human. Nimai's expression tightened. "They're tracking us," she confirmed. "Using dogs, probably." Fear clutched at Everett's chest. Dogs could follow a scent even through snow. "What do we do?" Nimai's eyes met his, resolute. "We separate." "No," he said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Listen to me," she insisted. "I can move faster alone, draw them away from you. You continue north with the supplies. I will find you." "It's too dangerous," Everett argued. "You're still healing. If they catch you, they will kill me," she finished matter-of-factly. "But they might not kill you. You're a white doctor. Valuable. They might believe you were coerced." The suggestion that he might claim coercion might betray her to save himself struck Everett like a physical blow. "I won't lie and say you forced me. This was my choice." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he couldn't name. "Then say nothing, but you must go on." Before he could protest further, she reached into her coat and withdrew a small leather pouch. Opening it, she removed a pungent mixture of dried herbs and crushed berries. "For the dogs," she explained, sprinkling some on her boots. "It confuses their sense of smell." She offered him the pouch. "Use it if they get too close." Everett accepted it reluctantly. "Where will you go?" "East. Then circle back north. There's a waterfall 2 miles that way." She pointed through the trees. "I'll follow the stream above it. Water leaves no scent." Her plan was sound, tactically speaking, but the thought of her facing their pursuers alone filled him with dread. "We should stay together." Nimai stepped closer, close enough that he could see the determination in her eyes. "If we stay together, we both die. This way, one of us might live. And if it's me who lives?" he asked quietly. She considered this. "Then you will have a story to tell, about a woman who was more than what they said she was." The voices grew louder. Time was running out. Everett knew with the rational part of his mind that her plan offered the best chance of survival. But another part of him, the part that had pulled her from the snow, that had watched over her through fever and pain, rebelled against the idea of abandoning her now. In the end, it was Nimai who made the decision. She reached up suddenly, her hand warm against his cold, numb cheek, and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that lasted only a moment but conveyed everything words could not. "For luck," she whispered, drawing back. "Now go." Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared into the snowy forest, moving with the swift silence of someone born to the wild. Everett stood frozen, the ghost of her touch still warm on his skin as the distance between them grew. The barking of dogs jolted him back to reality. With a heavy heart, he urged his horse forward, continuing north as she had instructed. Each step felt like a betrayal, yet he understood the brutal logic of her sacrifice. One of them might survive to tell their story, to bear witness. He had gone perhaps half a mile when the first gunshot echoed through the trees. Everett halted, his heart seizing. A second shot followed, then a third. Then silence. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to find her, to help somehow. But the rational part of his mind, the surgeon, who had learned to make impossible choices during the war, knew that would only ensure both their deaths. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the uncaring wilderness. "I'm so sorry." With leaden limbs, he pressed on, following the markers she had taught him to recognize. His medical bag bounced against his side with each step, a constant reminder of his oath to heal, to save lives. Yet here he was, abandoning the one life that had somehow become precious to him. The irony was not lost on him as he trudged through the deepening snow, alone once more in a land that had never truly welcomed him, that the woman he'd rescued might have ended up saving him instead, in more ways than one. Everett reached the caves as dawn broke on the fourth day, his body numb with cold and grief. The mountain face rose before him, jagged and imposing, with narrow fissures that might have been mistaken for shadows had Nimai not told him what to look for. He had followed her instructions faithfully, tracing the secret markers that led to this sanctuary. Even as each step away from the sound of those gunshots tore at his conscience, he approached cautiously, leading his exhausted horse. The largest opening was barely wide enough for a man to pass through sideways. Beyond it, he could see only darkness. "Hello?" he called softly, his voice echoing slightly. "I come seeking shelter. Nimi sent me." Silence answered him. He waited, counting heartbeats, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps there was no one here after all. Perhaps this was simply a cave, not the refuge she had described. Then movement caught his eye. A flicker within the shadows, the subtle shift of a figure emerging. A man stepped into the weak morning light, his lined face framed by gray-streaked hair. He wore a mixture of native and settler clothing, and in his hand was a rifle pointed steadily at Everett's chest. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his English accented but clear. "And how do you know that name?" Everett raised his hand slowly. "My name is Dr. Everett Hayes. Nimai was injured. I found her, treated her wounds. We were traveling here together, but we were pursued. His voice faltered. She led them away from me." The man's expression remained impassive, but his eyes, dark and penetrating like Nima's, studied Everett with fierce intensity. "Where is she now?" "I don't know," Everett admitted, the words like ashes in his mouth. "I heard gunshots. She told me to continue north to find you." For a long moment the man didn't move. Then he lowered the rifle slightly. "A white doctor," he said, more to himself than to Everett. "She trusted you?" Everett thought of her kiss, of the wordless message in that brief contact. "Yes," he said simply, "she did." The man nodded once. "A decision made. Come inside, quickly. The valley has eyes." Everett urged his horse toward the narrow opening. The man reached for the animal's bridle. "The horse cannot enter. There is a hollow behind those rocks. He will be hidden there." After settling his horse with the last of their feed, Everett followed the man into the caves. The passage twisted immediately, requiring him to duck his head as they ventured deeper. Then it widened abruptly into a cavern of surprising size. A small fire burned in a stone circle at its center, the smoke rising toward a natural chimney in the rock ceiling. Around it sat a handful of people, men, women, and children, their faces turned toward him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "This is the doctor," his guide announced. He traveled with Nimai. A murmur ran through the group. An elderly woman rose unsteadily to her feet, supporting herself on a gnarled walking stick. Her face was a map of deep wrinkles, her eyes clouded with cataracts, but her voice was strong when she spoke in her native tongue. The man translated. "She asks if you truly know Thunder, or if you merely use her name to gain entrance." "I know her," Everett replied, meeting the old woman's milky gaze. "She has cigar burns on her collarbone, a scar above her left eyebrow where I put 27 stitches. She told me she was the daughter of a medicine man and a woman not from her tribe." The translation sparked another round of murmurs. The old woman's expression softened. She spoke again, at length. "She says you speak truth," the man relayed. "Nimai is her granddaughter. I am Red Elk, her uncle. We thought her dead these many months." Relief washed through Everett. He had found the right people. "She nearly was when I found her." Red Elk gestured for him to sit by the fire. "Tell us everything," he said. "Leave nothing out." So Everett told them of finding Nimai hanging from the tree, of treating her wounds, of their flight from Marshal Thorne and their separation in the forest. As he spoke, he became aware of a young boy watching him intently from across the fire. The child's eyes were Nimai's eyes, set in a face that held her same fierce determination. When he finished his account, silence settled over the cave, broken only by the soft popping of the fire. The old woman Nimai's grandmother spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. Red Elk hesitated before translating. "She says you have the heart of our people, though your skin is pale. You risked your life for her granddaughter when others of your kind would have left her to die." Everett shook his head. "I did what any doctor would do, what any human should do." A sad smile touched Red Elk's lips. "If only that were true. Our experience with white men has taught us otherwise." He glanced at the gathered faces. "Everyone here has lost someone to their cruelty." The young boy who had been watching Everett so intently suddenly spoke up. Red Elk looked surprised, then translated. "He asks if you will go find his sister." "Sister," the word landed like a stone in Everett's chest. "Nimai is his sister?" Red Elk nodded. "Little Fox is her only living brother. Their parents were killed in the raid she told you about." Everett looked at the boy. Little Fox saw the hope burning in his young face. How could he explain that he had abandoned Nimai to her fate? That he had heard gunshots and still walked away? Single quotes he began, but Red Elk raised a hand to stop him. "You did as she asked," the older man said quietly. "No one blames you for this. Nimai has always made her own choices, even as a child." "I need to go back," Everett said, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke. "I need to find her." Red Elk exchanged glances with the grandmother. "It is too dangerous. The marshals will be watching for you now." "I don't care," Everett insisted. I'm a doctor. I can't leave someone wounded in the wilderness, not when I might help. And if she is beyond help, Red Elk asked gently, if those shots found their mark, the possibility had haunted Everett's every step since their separation. Then I still need to know. And ... single quotes, he glanced at Little Fox. Her family deserves to know as well. The old woman spoke again, her voice quavering. Red Elk translated. She says, the spirits told her Nimai still walks under the sky. She feels it in her bones. Hope flared in Everett's chest. Irrational, but powerful. Then I'll find her. Not today, Red Elk said firmly. You are exhausted, half-frozen. Rest first. Eat. Tomorrow I will go with you. Everett wanted to argue, to insist they leave immediately, but the wisdom of Red Elk's words was undeniable. He was in no condition to help anyone right now. Reluctantly, he nodded. They fed him a stew of dried meat and wild roots, simple but nourishing. As he ate, Little Fox edged closer, eventually sitting beside him. The boy didn't speak, but his presence felt like both a comfort and an accusation. Later, wrapped in borrowed blankets in a small alcove of the cave, Everett found sleep elusive despite his exhaustion. His mind replayed that last moment with Nima, her kiss, her command to go on without her. Had she known somehow that it might be their final goodbye? He was drifting in the hazy border between wakefulness and sleep when a commotion erupted near the cave entrance. Voices raised in surprise and excitement, footsteps hurrying across stone. Everett sat up, instantly alert. Red Elk appeared at the entrance to his alcove, a lantern in his hand casting long shadows across his weathered face. But it was his expression that sent Everett's heart racing, a mixture of disbelief and joy. Come quickly, Red Elk said. A miracle has happened. Everett scrambled to his feet, following Red Elk back to the main cavern. The entire group had gathered near the entrance passage, clustered around a figure that had collapsed to the ground. A figure with long black hair matted with blood and snow. A figure whose dark eyes, despite the exhaustion evident in them, somehow found his across the crowded cave. Nimai, Everett breathed, hardly daring to believe his eyes. She looked up at the sound of her name, a ghost of a smile touching her cracked lips. Doctor, she whispered. You found them. Single quotes. Then her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward into the waiting arms of her people. Everett's medical instincts took over as he pushed through the crowd to reach Nimai. She was unconscious now, her breathing shallow, her skin alarmingly cold to the touch. Blood had soaked through her left sleeve and frozen in dark patches. I need warm water, clean cloths, and light, he ordered, all exhaustion forgotten, and space. Everyone back. To his surprise, the gathered people responded immediately, dispersing to fetch what he needed. Red Elk and two women carefully carried Nimai deeper into the cave to a small chamber where furs and blankets had been arranged on a raised stone platform. Everett followed, his medical bag clutched tightly in his hand. By the light of several oil lamps, he began his examination. The wound was a bullet graze along her upper arm, painful and bleeding freely once the frozen blood was cleaned away, but not life-threatening. The real danger was from exposure. Her body temperature had dropped dangerously low, and her fingertips showed the early signs of frostbite. She needs warmth, Everett explained as he worked. Gradual, not sudden. Too much heat too quickly could shock her system. Red Elk translated for the others, who nodded in understanding. The old grandmother, whose name Everett learned, was swift feather supervised the warming of stones in the fire, which were then wrapped in hides and placed around Nime's body. Little Fox had slipped into the chamber and sat silently in a corner, watching the proceedings with anxious eyes. As Everett cleaned and bandaged the bullet wound, Nimai stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. She seemed disoriented at first, her gaze darting around the chamber before settling on Everett's face. You're here, she murmured, her voice barely audible. I'm here, he confirmed, his own voice rough with emotion. So are you. You made it. A weak smile touched her lips. Told you I would find you. A swift feather moved to her granddaughter's side, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks as she stroked Nime's hair and spoke softly in their language. Nime responded with a few halting words that made the old woman smile through her tears. She asks about you, Red Elk translated for Everett. Wants to know if you are hurt. Everett shook his head, amazed at her concern for him despite her own condition. Tell her I'm fine. It's her we need to worry about. As he continued his treatment, applying salves to her frostbitten fingers and monitoring her slowly rising temperature, Nimai drifted in and out of consciousness. During one lucid period, Little Fox crept to her side, his small hand reaching for hers. The tenderness with which she touched her brother's cheek, despite her obvious pain, brought a lump to Everett's throat. It was several hours before her condition stabilized enough for Everett to feel she was out of immediate danger. By then, the cave had grown quiet, most of its inhabitants having retired to their respective sleeping area. Only Red Elk remained sitting across from Everett in the small chamber. You have questions, the older man observed. Everett nodded. How did she survive? I heard gunshots. I thought ... Single quote. She will tell you herself when she is stronger, Red Elk replied. But I know my niece. She is clever, and she knows the land better than those who hunted her. Single quotes. Everett glanced at Nimai. Now sleeping peacefully, her color improved. She is remarkable. Yes, Red Elk agreed. But then so are you, Dr. Hayes. Me? Everett looked up in surprise. I'm just a physician doing his job. Red Elk shook his head. You abandoned your home, your position, everything you knew to help a woman many of your people would consider an enemy. That is more than a job. Everett had no response to that. He had acted on instinct, on principle, yes, but also on something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name even to himself. What will happen now? He asked instead. Thorn won't stop hunting her, or me, for that matter. Red Elk's expression grew somber. Spring will come, the mountain passes will open. Some of us will journey further north across the border to Canada. There are communities there, mixed tribes, some half-breeds, even a few whites who have chosen our way. They live free from the reservation system, and until then, we wait, we survive, as we have always done. The simplicity of this answer struck Everett as both profound and heartbreaking. To live in constant flight and hiding, what kind of life was that? There must be another way, he said, thinking aloud. Some legal recourse. Hammond's son was abusing her. Surely that would count as self-defense. Red Elk's laugh was hollow. Legal? For us? The law was not made to protect people like Nimai, Doctor. It was made to control us, to justify taking what is ours. He gestured around the cave. Why do you think we hide here like animals? Because your courts have no justice for Indian blood. The truth of these words stung. Everett had seen enough in his 3 years on the frontier to know Red Elk was right. The courts, the marshals, the entire system was designed to favor settlers over the indigenous population. Even as a white man with privilege and education, he had sometimes found the frontier justice system arbitrary and corrupt. For someone like Nimai, there would be no fair trial, no consideration of mitigating circumstances, only a rope. I'll stay, Everett said suddenly, the decision crystallizing in his mind. Until she's fully recovered, at least. Red Elk studied him for a long moment, and after that, it was the question Everett had been avoiding. His old life was gone now, his cabin abandoned, his reputation likely in tatters. Once word spread that he'd fled with a fugitive. He could try to start over somewhere else, perhaps in a city where his medical skills would be valued regardless of his past. But the thought of leaving Nimai, of never seeing her again, created a hollow ache in his chest. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Red Elk nodded as if this answer satisfied him. Sometimes the path reveals itself only as we walk it. He rose from his seat. Rest now, Doctor. Tomorrow will bring its own decisions. Left alone with Nimai, Everett settled into the chair beside her sleeping form. Her breathing had deepened, her body relaxing as warmth returned. The bullet graze would heal clean. He was certain of that now. The rest of her injuries, both physical and otherwise, would take longer. He must have dozed off at some point because he woke to the sensation of fingers brushing against his hand. Opening his eyes, he found Nimai watching it, her gaze clearer now. You should sleep in a proper bed, she whispered, not in a chair. Everett straightened, wincing at the stiffness in his neck. I wanted to monitor your condition. She smiled slightly. Always the doctor. How are you feeling? He asked, automatically reaching to check her pulse. Like I was shot and then walked through a blizzard, she replied, a hint of her dry humor returning. But I will live thanks to you, thanks to your own strength, corrected. I've never seen anyone so determined to survive. Her expression sobered. I had reason to return. Single quotes. The way she looked at him sent warmth spreading through his chest. He cleared his throat. Your family is overjoyed to have you back, especially your brother. Little Fox, she said, smiling again. He has grown since I saw him last. He never gave up hope, Everett told her. Neither did your grandmother. She said the spirits told her you were still alive. Nimai nodded. Swift Feather sees with more than her eyes. She shifted slightly, wincing. The men who chased us, did they follow you here? No, Everett reassured her. I saw no sign of pursuit after ... single quotes. He hesitated. After we separated, a shadow crossed her face. They were close behind me. I led them east as I said I would. One saw me crossing a ridge. He fired. That's when you were hit? She nodded. The bullet burned my arm. I fell down the other side of the ridge. They thought I was dead or too injured to survive. They searched for a while, then left. Her voice grew quieter. I hid until dark, then followed the stars north. Everett marveled at her resilience. You walked all that way with a gunshot wound in a blizzard. I made a promise, she said simply. To find you. The directness of her gaze, the weight of meaning behind those words left Everett momentarily speechless. In Boston, courtship had been a complicated dance of social rules and careful words. Here, with Nimai, there was only true, thaw, and unadorned. I'm glad you did, he finally said, his voice low. When I heard those shots, I thought ... single quotes. He couldn't finish the sentence. Nimai's hand found his, her fingers twining with his. Death did not want me yet, she said, and I had something to live for. They sat in silence then, hands linked as the cave around them settled into the deep quiet of pre-dawn. Outside, the winter held the world in its frozen grip, but here, in this moment, Everett felt a warmth he'd almost forgotten existed. Days in the cave blended together, marked only by the subtle shifts of light that filtered through hidden openings in the rock. 2 weeks passed as Nimai regained her strength. Everett watched her transformation with quiet amazement, the way she moved from bedridden to ambulatory within days. How her sharp mind engaged with every aspect of cave life despite her injuries. He found himself adapting to the rhythm of this hidden community. During the day, he treated various ailments among the refugees, a child's cough, an elder's arthritis, infected cuts that had been poorly tended. His medical supplies dwindled, but he improvised, learning from Swift Feather which plants could be used for poultices and teas. In the evenings, they gathered around the central fire, sharing food and stories. Red Elk often translated for Everett, though he had begun picking up words and phrases in the Blackfoot language. Little Fox proved an especially enthusiastic teacher, delighting in Everett's clumsy attempts to pronounce difficult sounds. Nimai watched these lessons with undisguised amusement. Your tongue is not made for our words, she teased one night after a particularly mangled attempt. My tongue was raised on Boston Latin and Greek, Everett replied good-naturedly. It needs time to adapt, she smiled, something she did more freely now. Like the rest of you. It was true. He was adapting in ways he never would have imagined possible. The discomforts he once would have found intolerable, the hard stone beneath his sleeping furs, the limited diet, the lack of privacy, now seemed trivial compared to the rich human connections he was forming. For the first time since the war, perhaps even before, he felt purposeful, needed. On the 17th day, Nimue declared herself well enough to venture outside. I need sky, she announced at breakfast. Walls close in, even stone one's dots. Single quotes, Everett frowned. Your arm is still healed, and it's dangerous. We won't go far, she assured him. Just to the high ledge. It's sheltered, hidden from below. Red Elk says there's been no sign of marshals for days. He wanted to protest further, but the eagerness in her eyes stopped him. Confinement was its own kind of medicine. Necessary but bitter. All right, he conceded, but I'm coming with you. They bundled in furs against the February cold and made their way through a narrow side passage that wound upward. Nimue moved with confidence despite the dim light, her hand occasionally reaching back to guide him around a sharp turn or low overhang. The passage eventually opened onto a small plateau, sheltered on three sides by rock walls, but open to the west. The view stole Everett's breath, mountains stretching into the distance, valleys blanketed in snow, the sun beginning its descent in a sky so intensely blue it seemed almost artificial. Nimue stepped to the edge, her face tilted up to catch the sunlight. Beautiful, she murmured, closing her eyes. I needed this. Everett watched her rather than the view, struck by how the sunlight transformed her. In the cave she had been recovering, fragile in some ways despite her strength of will. Here, with the wind tugging at her hair and color rising in her cheeks, she looked powerful, elemental. My father brought me to places like this, she said after a while, her eyes still on the distant horizon. High places where the air is thin and the spirits speak more clearly. He said mountains remind us how small we are, but also how we can rise above the earth and touch the sky. He sounds like a wise man, Everett said softly. She nodded. He was. He saw things others couldn't. She turned to face him then. He would have liked you, I think. Why do you say that? Because you see people, not just their skin or their tribe. You listen, she gestured at the mountains, and you understand the language of high places. Everett wasn't sure what she meant by that last part, but the approval in her voice warmed him nonetheless. They stood in companionable silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the snow. What will you do when spring comes? Nimue asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. I'm not sure, he admitted. I can't go back to my cabin. Thorn would be waiting. You could go to another territory, start again. The doctor's welcome anywhere. There was something careful in her tone, as if she was trying to maintain distance from the answer. Everett studied her profile. Is that what you think I should do? She shrugged, the gesture too deliberate to be casual. It would be safest. For whom? Her eyes met his, unflinching. For you. And what about you? He pressed. What will you do? Go north with the others when the pass is clear, she replied. There's nothing for me here anymore. Everett felt a tightness in his chest at the thought of their inevitable separation. These weeks in the cave had created a bond between them that defied easy categorization, deeper than friendship, charged with an attraction neither had acted upon but both acknowledged in small gestures and lingering glances. Nothing, he echoed, the word holding more weight than he intended. Nimue looked away. My family is what matters now, keeping them safe. Little Fox deserves a chance at a life without fear. And what do you deserve, Nimue? The question hung between them, delicate and dangerous. She didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains as if they might hold the response she sought. I stopped thinking about what I deserve, she finally said. Survival doesn't allow for such luxury. Everett moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her despite the winter air. Quote, maybe it should. She turned to him then, her expression a complex mixture of longing and resignation. Everett, she said, the first time she had used his given name. You saved my life. I will always be grateful. But our paths crossed by chance, not design. I don't believe that, he said firmly. What do you believe? That some meetings change us forever. He reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. That sometimes we find exactly what we need, even if we didn't know we were looking. Her fingers tightened around his, but her expression remained guarded. You speak of fate, my father would approve. A small smile touched her lips. But fate is not always kind, especially to people like me. Then we make our own fate, Everett said, conviction in his voice surprising even him. Nimue studied him as if trying to decipher some hidden message in his features. How? She asked simply. It was a question he wasn't prepared to answer, not fully. The obstacles between them seemed insurmountable. Her status as a fugitive, the societal barriers that would condemn any relationship between them, the practical realities of survival in a harsh land. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I know I'm not ready to say goodbye. Something shifted in her expression, then a softening, a hope carefully contained. The winter is long, she said. We have time to think. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a rejection either. Everett would take it. Yes, he agreed. We have time. They stood together as the sun sank lower, casting the snow-covered valley in hues of gold and rose. In that moment, Despite the uncertainty of their future, Everett felt a peace he hadn't known in years, perhaps ever. As they made their way back to the cave entrance, Nimai paused, her head tilted in that listening posture he had come to recognize. "Someone's coming," she said, her body tensing. Everett strained his ears but heard nothing. "Are you sure?" She nodded, already moving toward the passage with renewed urgency. Many people. Horses. Fear clutched at his chest. "Thorn? I don't know." Her expression had transformed, all softness gone, "but we need to warn the others now." They hurried back through the twisting passage, the peaceful moment on the ledge shattered by the threat of discovery. As they reached the main cavern, Red Elk was already mobilizing the small community, his face grim. "Soldiers," he confirmed, answering their unspoken question. "A full patrol. One of our scouts just returned with the news." The relative safety they had found in the cave suddenly seemed as fragile as a soap bubble, ready to burst at the slightest touch. The cave erupted into controlled chaos as families gathered their meager possessions. Children were hushed, fires extinguished, and emergency supplies distributed. Everett marveled at the efficiency of their response. A well-rehearsed evacuation born of brutal necessity. "How did they find us?" he asked Red Elk, who was supervising the dismantling of the main camp. "Perhaps they didn't," the older man replied, his voice low and tense. "They may be conducting a standard patrol, but we cannot take that risk." Nimai was helping Swift Feather, who moved with painful slowness. The old woman clutched a small medicine bundle to her chest, refusing to relinquish it even as she struggled to keep pace. "Where will everyone go?" Everett asked, his medical bag already slung across his shoulder. "There are other shelters," Red Elk explained. "Smaller caves, hunting blinds, abandoned mining tunnels. We will scatter, then regroup when it's safe." The practiced nature of this exodus struck Everett anew. This was not the first time these people had fled at a moment's notice, leaving behind what little security they had managed to establish. This was their reality. Constant vigilance. Perpetual flight. Dr. Red Elk continued, lowering his voice further. "You should know that if you are captured, it would be better for all of us if you claimed you were held here against your will." Everett stiffened. "I won't lie. This is not about honor," Red Elk insisted. "It is about survival. A white doctor captured with Indians will be suspected of going native. They will make an example of you unless you give them another story." Before Everett could argue further, Nimai appeared at his side. "He's right," she said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "You still have a chance at your old life. We don't. I'm not abandoning you," Everett said firmly. "Any of you." A shadow of a smile crossed her face. "Stubborn man." Red Elk looked between them, his expression unreadable. "You two will go with Little Fox and Swift Feather," he decided. "North Tunnel, to the Ridge Cave. It's small but defensible." The evacuation continued with quiet efficiency. Within 20 minutes, the main cavern stood empty, all traces of habitation carefully removed or concealed. The refugees split into smaller groups, each taking a different exit route from the cave system. Everett helped Swift Feather through the narrow northern passage, supporting her fragile frame as they climbed steadily up. Nimai led the way, Little Fox close behind her, both moving with the silent grace of those born to the wilderness. Behind them, the sounds of the other evacuees faded, until there was only the rasp of their own breathing and the occasional scrape of boots against stone. After nearly an hour of difficult travel, they emerged onto a narrow ledge halfway up a sheer rock face. A crevice, barely visible unless one knew exactly where to look, led to a small cave barely large enough for the four of them. From this vantage point, they could see the valley below, including the main cave entrance they had abandoned. And there, moving through the trees with military precision, was a column of blue-coated soldiers, at least 20 men, led by a figure Everett recognized even at this distance. Marshal Thorne. They knew exactly where to look, Everett murmured, watching as the soldiers surrounded the cave entrance. This wasn't a random patrol. Nimai's expression hardened. "Someone betrayed us. Who would do such a thing?" Everett asked, scanning the soldiers for clues. "Someone desperate. Someone scared." Her voice held no judgment, only a weary understanding. "Fear makes people do terrible things." Little Fox tugged at his sister's sleeve, pointing excitedly. "Look." Following his gesture, they saw a lone figure emerging from the trees on horseback, a civilian riding alongside the military column. Even from this distance, the man's familiar gait was unmistakable. "Jim Porter," Everett breathed, disbelief giving way to anger. "The trapper who brought me the message about the injured logger. He must have followed us here, or followed your tracks when you first arrived," Nimai suggested. "Either way, he has sold us for whatever reward Thorne offered." They watched in tense silence as the soldiers methodically searched the abandoned cave. Even from their elevated position, they could hear Thorne's shouts of frustration when he discovered the place empty. The soldiers fanned out, beginning a wider search of the surrounding area. "Will they find the others?" Everett asked anxiously. "Some, perhaps," Nimai admitted, "but not all. We know these mountains too well." Swift Feather spoke then, her voice a cracked whisper. Red Elk wasn't there to translate, but Nimai nodded at her grandmother's words. "She says this place has hidden our people for generations," Nimai explained. "It will not betray us now." As night fell, they retreated deeper into the small cave. There could be no fire, no light that might betray their position to the searchers below. They huddled together for warmth, sharing the meager rations Red Elk had pressed into their hands during the evacuation. Little Fox eventually fell asleep, his head resting in his sister's lap. Swift Feather dozed fitfully, murmuring occasionally in her dream. Only Everett and Nimai remained awake, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, finding comfort in the simple human contact. "What happens now?" Everett asked, his voice barely audible. "We wait," Nimai replied simply. "They cannot search forever. They have limited supplies, limited patience. When they leave, we will find the others. And if they don't leave," she was silent for a long moment, "then we find another way." The confidence in her voice, despite their desperate situation, gave Everett strength. "I've been thinking about what you asked me on the ledge," he said, "about what I'll do when spring comes." In the darkness, he felt rather than saw her attention shift to him. "And I want to go north with you," he said, the words coming easier than he expected. "If you'll have me." Her silence stretched so long he feared he had overstepped. Then finally, "Why?" It was a fair question, one he had asked himself repeatedly during their time in the cave. "Because for the first time in years I feel alive," he answered honestly. "Because the work I've done here matters in a way it never did in my fine Boston hospital, or even in my frontier cabin. Because," he hesitated, then pressed on, "because when I thought I'd lost you in that forest, I realized I couldn't bear it." He felt her hand find his in the darkness. "The path would not be easy," she warned. "You would be leaving everything you know." "I left that behind the moment I cut you down from that tree," Everett replied. "I just didn't realize it then." She leaned against him slightly, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. "My people have a saying, when the thunder speaks, wise ones listen." Everett smiled, recognizing the reference to her name. "And what is the thunder saying now?" "That sometimes the storm brings not destruction, but renewal." Her fingers tightened around his. "I would welcome your company on the northern path." Everett Hayes. It wasn't a declaration of love, not in the flowery way of Boston courtships, but it held more truth, more substance than any such proclamation. In the darkness of that small cave, surrounded by danger on all sides, they had found something rare and precious. The night deepened around them, the cold intensifying as the temperature dropped. Below, the soldiers maintained their search, torches visible as tiny points of light moving through the valley. Occasionally, shouts echoed up the mountainside, but they grew more infrequent as the hours passed. Near dawn, a new sound reached them, the high, lonesome call of a wolf from the ridgeline above. It was answered by another, then a third from different directions. Little Fox woke instantly, his eyes wide. "The signal," he whispered excitedly. Nimai nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Our people are safe," she explained to Everett. "The wolves tell us the soldiers are leaving." Sure enough, as the first pale light of morning touched the eastern sky, they could see the military column reassembling in the valley below, preparing to depart. Whatever orders Thorne had given, whatever promises Porter had made, the search was being abandoned for now at least. But Everett knew this reprieve was temporary. Spring would come, the snow would melt, and decisions would need to be made that would shape the rest of their lives. Spring arrived with startling swiftness. One day the mountains stood frozen and impenetrable. The next, rivulets of snowmelt carved glistening paths down rocky slopes, and the first brave shoots of green pushed through the softening earth. 2 months had passed since the soldiers' failed search. The scattered refugees had regrouped, moving higher into the mountains as the snow retreated, always vigilant, always planning their next move. The passes to the north would open soon, offering a path to the Canadian territories and the promise of relative safety. Everett had settled into a routine among Nimai's people, his medical skills earning him a place of respect within the community. He had learned more of their language, enough to communicate without translation, and had absorbed the basics of their traditional medicine under Swift Feather's patient tutelage. His relationship with Nimai had deepened, though slowly, both of them cautious after lives marked by loss. They moved in a careful dance of growing intimacy, shoulders touching as they worked, hands lingering when passing objects, quiet conversations that stretched into the nights. Nothing was declared outright, but understanding grew between them like the spring itself, inevitable, vital, renewing. On a clear April morning, Red Elk called a council. The group gathered in a protected meadow, sitting in a circle as their ancestors had done for countless generations. "The time has come to decide," the older man announced. "The northern pass will be clear within 2 weeks. Those who wish to continue to Canada must prepare." Most nodded in agreement. The decision had been made months ago for many of them. There was no future for them in the territories. Not with the reservation system expanding and the Army's increasing pressure on free-roaming bands. "What news of Thorne?" someone asked. Red Elk's expression darkened. "Our friends in the settlement say he has not given up. He speaks openly of returning when the snow clears completely. He means to find us, especially." His eyes flicked briefly to Nimai. "Those he has marked for justice." A murmur ran through the group. Everett felt Nimai tense beside him, her jaw set in that determined line he had come to know so well. "Then we go north," an elder declared. "All of us." "There is another possibility," Nimai said suddenly, her voice voice clear in the morning air. All eyes turned to her in surprise. I have been thinking about the doctor's homestead. Everett stared at her, confused. My cabin? It's probably been claimed by now, or burned. She shook her head. Not the cabin, the land. You told me once it was remote, difficult to access except by the main trail, that it had good water, fertile soil. Yes, Everett confirmed, still not understanding. But it's also the first place Thorn would look for us. For you and me, yes, Nimai agreed, but not for others. Not if we draw him away. Red Elk leaned forward, intrigued. What are you suggesting, niece? Nimai looked around the circle, her gaze lingering on the children, the elders, those least able to endure the difficult journey north. Not everyone here can make it to Canada. The journey is too hard, the risk too great for some. Swiftfeather spoke then, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Nimai translated for Everett. She says the spirits have shown her a circle ending where we began, but different. The homestead could support those who stay, Nimai continued, hidden in plain sight. While Thorn chases us north, others could make a life there. The audacity of the plan struck Everett with full force. You're suggesting we use ourselves as bait to lead Thorn away while establishing a settlement on my abandoned property. Nimai nodded, her eyes bright with conviction. It would need someone to lead them, someone who knows both worlds. All eyes turned to Red Elk, who sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, he spoke. It would be dangerous. If discovered, all paths hold danger now, Nimai countered. But this one offers hope for those who cannot travel far. A hidden place, a new beginning. The discussion continued for hours. The plan taking shape, objections raised and addressed. By midday, a consensus had emerged. A small group, mostly elders, young children, and their caregivers would travel secretly to Everett's former homestead. Guided by Red Elk, they would rebuild, plant, and establish a hidden community in the remote valley. Meanwhile, Nimai and Everett, along with the younger, stronger members of the band, would create a visible trail heading north, drawing Thorn and his men away from the vulnerable settlement. Once we've led them far enough, Nimai explained, we can double back through the high passes. By then, the homestead should be established. It was audacious, risky, and brilliant. Everett found himself nodding, hope kindling in his chest for the first time in months. It could work, he said, looking at Nimai with undisguised admiration. It really could. As the council dispersed to begin preparations, Nimai took Everett's hand and led him away from the others, up a small rise that overlooked the meadow. The spring sun warmed their faces as they sat side by side, watching the bustling activity below. You didn't tell me you were planning this? Everett said, not accusingly but with curiosity. It came to me in dreams, she admitted. At first I thought it was just wishful thinking, but then ... single quotes, she hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. I realized it wasn't just a dream about safety, it was a dream about home. Home, Everett repeated, the word catching in his throat. How long had it been since anywhere truly felt like home to him? Not the cabin, certainly. Perhaps not even Boston, with its stifling propriety and painful memories of the war. I've been thinking about what you said, Nimai continued, about going north with me. I want that. But I also want ... She gestured at the activity below. I want this. Our people. Together, safe, building something that lasts. Everett understood then. You're not planning to stay in Canada, are you? Once we've led Thorn away, you intend to return to the homestead. She met his gaze directly. Yes, if you're willing. The future unfolded before him in that moment, not the isolated existence he'd carved out as a frontier doctor, nor the complete abandonment of his previous life that going to Canada would entail, but something new, a community, a purpose, a home built on the very land he had once neglected, now brought to life by the woman he had rescued and the people who had taken him in. I'm more than willing, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It's what I want too. Her smile then was like sunrise after the longest night. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his in the intimate gesture of her people. Then we have a path. 2 weeks later, as the first group set out secretly for the homestead, Everett stood with Nimai at the edge of the camp, watching Red Elk lead Swiftfeather and the others down the hidden trail. Little Fox had insisted on staying with his sister, his young face set with determination as he helped prepare for their diversionary journey north. He had grown in the months since their first meeting, both in height and in confidence. No longer the silent, watchful child of the cave. Will it work? Everett asked quietly as the departing group disappeared into the trees. Nimai's hand found his, fingers intertwining with practiced ease. It has to, she replied simply. The northern party departed the next day, leaving clear. Obvious signs of their passage tracks a child could follow. Abandoned campsites, still warm, markers that practically screamed their direction. As expected, Thorn and his men picked up the trail within days. The chase had begun. For 6 weeks, they led the marshal on a grueling pursuit through the northern territories, always staying just ahead, always leaving enough evidence to keep him following. When they finally crossed into Canada, even Thorn had to admit defeat, at least temporarily. The international boundary provided a protection that even his obsession couldn't overcome without official sanction. But Nimai and Everett didn't linger in the safety of Canadian soil. As soon as they were certain Thorn had turned back, they began their return journey, taking the high mountain routes that only the most experienced wilderness travelers could navigate. It was high summer when they finally approached the valley that held Everett's former homestead. From the ridge above, above. They paused to take in the transformation below. The cabin had been rebuilt and expanded. New structures had risen nearby, small lodges built in the traditional style but partially concealed by the natural landscape. Gardens flourished where once there had been only neglected fields. Green rows of corn and beans and squash drinking in the summer sun. A small herd of goats grazed in a meadow, tended by children whose laughter carried faintly on the breeze. "It's alive," Everett breathed, awestruck by the change. All of it. Beside him, Nime's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Home," she said simply. As they descended into the valley, Red Elk emerged from the cabin to greet them, his weathered face breaking into a rare, broad smile. Swift Feather stood in the doorway behind him, her gnarled hands raised in welcome. "The frontier doctor returns," Red Elk called. "And not alone. Never alone again," Everett replied, his arm around Nime's waist. The homestead he had abandoned had been reborn not just as a place of shelter, but as a true home, a sanctuary where two worlds met, where healing happened, where life continued despite all odds. And as Little Fox ran down the path to embrace his sister, as the community gathered to welcome them home, Everett knew with bone-deep certainty that he had found where he belonged with this woman who had been left for dead, who had survived against all odds, and who had brought life back to more than just an abandoned homestead. She had brought life back to him.